The millionaire forced his daughter to marry a humble gardener without imagining the impact it would have on their lives. Sarah sighed deeply as she gazed out at the vast garden of the mansion from her bedroom balcony. At 25, she felt her life was at a standstill, trapped in a gilded cage by the implacable will of her father, Andrew. Since her mother's death 5 years ago, the relationship between father and daughter had deteriorated into a constant battleground. The sound of knuckles rapping on her door pulled her from her thoughts. "Miss Sarah," called the voice of Rose, the housekeeper, "your father is waiting for you in his study. He says it's urgent." Sarah closed her eyes, mentally preparing herself for another confrontation. "Thank you, Rose. I'll be right there." With determined steps, Sarah walked the long hallways of the mansion until she reached her father's study. She took a deep breath before knocking on the door. "Come in," Andrew's deep voice resonated. As she entered, Sarah found her father standing by the window, his imposing figure silhouetted against the evening light. Without turning around, Andrew spoke. "Sarah, I've made a decision about your future." Sarah's heart raced. Every time her father uttered those words, her life took a drastic and unwanted turn. "What is it this time, father?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Andrew turned slowly, his cold eyes boring into his daughter's. "You will be married. In a month." Sarah felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. "What? To whom?" An enigmatic smile played on Andrew's lips. "To Jason, the gardener." Sarah's world stopped for an instant. Jason, the young man who tended the roses and pruned the shrubs. This had to be a cruel joke. "Have you lost your mind?" Sarah exclaimed, disbelief quickly giving way to anger. "How can you even suggest such a thing?" Andrew remained impassive in the face of his daughter's outburst. "It's not a suggestion, Sarah. It's a decision that's been made. You will marry Jason and live with him in the service house on the estate grounds." Sarah felt tears threatening to spill, but she refused to show weakness in front of her father. "Why are you doing this? Is it some kind of twisted punishment?" "On the contrary," Andrew replied, his voice laden with an irritating calm. "It's a lesson you need to learn. You've lived too long in a bubble of luxury and privilege. It's time you understand the value of hard work and a simple life." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her father had always been controlling, but this was madness. "You can't force me," she defied, though deep down she knew her father had ways of getting what he wanted. Andrew approached his desk and pulled out an envelope. "I can and I will. If you refuse, all your accounts will be frozen and you'll be disinherited. You'll have to face the world without a penny to your name." Sarah felt the ground move beneath her feet. Her father had her cornered and she knew it. "And Jason?" she asked, clinging to a last thread of hope. "What does he say about all this?" "Jason has accepted," Andrew replied with a satisfied smile. "Tomorrow you'll meet him formally as your fiancé." Unable to contain her tears any longer, Sarah ran out of the study. As she ran through the hallways, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. How could her father do this to her? And why had Jason accepted? What Sarah didn't know was that at that very moment, Jason was sitting in the small kitchen of the service house, his head in his hands, fighting his own internal battle. In front of him, on the worn table, lay an envelope with his mother's medical results. Advanced stage cancer. The treatment that could save her life was out of his reach, until Andrew made him the offer that would change his and Sarah's lives forever. As night fell over the mansion, two tormented souls prepared for a future neither had chosen, but which was about to unite them in ways they could never have imagined. The next morning dawned grey and cloudy, as if the sky reflected Sarah's mood. She dressed mechanically, choosing a simple black dress that perfectly expressed her mourning for the life she was about to lose. When she descended the stairs, she found her father waiting for her in the foyer. "Good morning, Sarah," Andrew greeted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's time for you to formally meet your fiancé." Sarah didn't respond, silently following her father to the garden. There, next to a rose bush in full bloom, stood Jason. Sarah had seen him many times before, but had never paid him real attention. Now she observed him with new eyes. Jason was tall and slim, with calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. His face, tanned by the sun, showed an expression of discomfort and nervousness. When he saw Sarah and Andrew approaching, He straightened up, trying to appear more confident than he really felt. "Jason," Andrew called. "Come here, boy." Obediently, Jason approached, his eyes briefly meeting Sarah's before lowering his gaze. "Sarah," said Andrew, "as you know, this is Jason, your future husband." The silence that followed was tense and laden with unexpressed emotions. Sarah looked at Jason with a mixture of resentment and curiosity. Why had he accepted this absurd arrangement? "I'll leave you to get to know each other better," Andrew announced, retreating with a satisfied smile. Once alone, Sarah could no longer contain her frustration. "Why did you accept this?" she spat. "What do you gain from this marriage farce?" Jason raised his gaze, his brown eyes filled with a sadness that took Sarah by surprise. "I had no choice," he replied quietly. "My mother, she's very ill. Mr. Andrew promised to pay for her treatment if I agreed to marry you." The revelation hit Sarah like a cold wave. Suddenly, the image she had of Jason as an opportunist crumbled. I'm sorry," she murmured, not knowing what else to say. Jason gave a sad smile. "It's not your fault. Neither of us wants this, but it seems we have no alternative." Sarah nodded slowly, processing the information. "My father. He always gets what he wants," she said bitterly. "Maybe," Jason replied, "but that doesn't mean we have to let him take away our dignity. We can do this on our terms." Sarah looked at him curiously. "So what do you mean?" "I propose a deal," said Jason, his voice gaining strength. "We'll get married as your father wants. We'll live together in the service house, but it will be a marriage in name only. We'll be companions, maybe even friends, but nothing more. And meanwhile, we'll look for a way to free ourselves from this arrangement." Sarah considered the proposal. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the alternative. "All right," she finally said, extending her hand. "Deal." Jason took her hand, sealing their agreement. At that moment, a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the garden. Sarah couldn't help but notice how the light played in Jason's dark hair, giving it an almost golden sheen. "You know," said Jason, looking around, "this garden has been my refuge for years. Maybe it can be yours too." Sarah followed his gaze, seeing for the first time the beauty that surrounded her. The roses, the lilies, the daisies, each flower seemed to tell a story. "Maybe," she replied, feeling something inside her begin to change. "Maybe." As they walked together through the garden, talking about their lives and their frustrated dreams, Sarah realized that Jason was much more than she had imagined. He was intelligent, kind, and had a passion for life that was contagious. For his part, Jason discovered that beneath the facade of a rich, spoiled girl, Sarah was a strong and determined woman, with a heart that yearned for freedom and purpose. As the day progressed, both felt that, despite the circumstances, they might have found an unexpected ally in each other. What neither of them knew was that Andrew was watching them from the window of his study, an enigmatic smile on his lips. His plan was in motion, and soon, very soon, all the pieces would fall into place. The days flew by, and before Sarah and Jason could fully process it, their wedding day arrived. The Blackwell mansion had been transformed into a scene of luxury and opulence, a facade that hid the true nature of the event. Sarah found herself in her room, looking in the mirror while Rose, the housekeeper, adjusted the final details of her wedding dress. The reflection that stared back at her was that of a beautiful but tormented woman, with eyes that shone not with happiness, but with determination. "You look lovely, Miss Sarah," said Rose with a sad smile, aware of the true situation. Sarah tried to smile, but the gesture didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Rose. At least one of us can pretend this is a happy occasion." At that moment, someone knocked on the door. It was Andrew. "Ready, my daughter?" he asked with a smile that Sarah thought looked more like a grimace. "As ready as one can be for a farce," Sarah responded bitterly. Andrew frowned. "This attitude of yours has to change, Sarah. It's for your own good." Sarah bit her tongue, knowing that arguing would serve no purpose. In silence, she took the arm her father offered, and together they descended the stairs towards the garden, where the ceremony would take place. The garden, normally a haven of peace and beauty, had been transformed into a fairy tale setting. White flowers and silk ribbons decorated every corner, and a petal-covered aisle led to a floral arch where the judge who would officiate the ceremony waited. And there, at the end of the aisle, was Jason. Sarah had to admit that he looked handsome in his black suit, though the discomfort was evident in his rigid posture and restless gaze. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Sarah felt all eyes on her. The guests, all business partners and friends of Andrew's high society circle, whispered among themselves, no doubt commenting on the strange couple and the circumstances of the wedding. When she finally reached Jason's side, their gazes met. In his eyes, Sarah saw reflected her own mixture of resignation and determination. Without words, they communicated a clear message: we're in this together. The ceremony passed like a blurry dream for Sarah. She vaguely heard the judge's words, mechanically responded, "I do," when the time came, and felt the cold metal band slide onto her finger as they exchanged rings. When the judge declared them husband and wife, there was a moment of hesitation. Should they kiss? Sarah and Jason looked at each other, undecided. Finally, Jason leaned in and placed a chaste kiss on Sarah's cheek. The gesture, though small, conveyed more comfort than Sarah had expected. The reception that followed was another display of Andrew's power and influence. Champagne flowed freely. The orchestra played cheerful melodies, and the guests danced and laughed, oblivious to the drama unfolding beneath the surface. Sarah and Jason played their roles as best they could, smiling for photos, accepting congratulations, and dancing the traditional first dance as a married couple. But for both of them, every minute felt like an eternity. At one point during the night, while Jason was distracted talking to some guests, Sarah slipped away to a quiet corner of the garden. She needed a moment to breathe, to process everything that had happened. The morning after the wedding, Sarah woke up in an unfamiliar bed, in a room that wasn't hers. For a moment, disorientation overwhelmed her, until memories of the previous day came crashing back like an avalanche. She had married Jason, and now she lived in the service house on the mansion grounds. She got up slowly, noticing that Jason wasn't in the room. An aroma of freshly brewed coffee guided her to the small kitchen, where she found her now husband preparing breakfast. "Good morning," Jason greeted with a shy smile. "I hope you like strong coffee." Sarah nodded, grateful for the gesture. "Thank you," she murmured, taking the cup he offered. They sat in silence, the ticking of the wall clock marking the passage of time. Finally, Jason spoke. "I know this isn't what either of us wanted, but maybe we can make it work somehow." Sarah looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "How?" she asked. Jason shrugged. "We could start by getting to know each other better, and maybe you could help me in the garden if you want, of course." The idea of working in the garden, of getting her hands dirty with soil, was something completely foreign to Sarah's experience. However, something in Jason's proposal sparked her curiosity. "All right," she agreed, "but I warn you, I know nothing about gardening." Jason smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face. "Don't worry, I'll teach you." And so began a new routine for Sarah. Every morning after breakfast, she accompanied Jason to the garden. At first, she felt awkward and out of place, her delicate hands unaccustomed to physical work. But over time, she began to find a strange peace in the task of caring for the plants. Jason turned out to be a patient and enthusiastic teacher. He taught Sarah the names of different flowers and plants, how to care for them, when to water them. He showed her how to prune rose bushes to make them bloom more vigorously, how to plant seeds and watch them grow day by day. As the days passed, Sarah found herself looking forward to mornings in the garden, not only for the satisfaction of seeing the plants grow under her care, but also for the conversations with Jason. She discovered that he was much more than a simple gardener. He was an intelligent and sensitive man, with a passion for nature that was contagious. He told her about his dreams of studying botany, dreams he had had to postpone to care for his sick mother. For her part, Sarah told him about her lonely childhood, how her mother's death had created an unbridgeable gap between her and her father. She told him about her own frustrated dreams of studying art, a passion that Andrew had always considered a waste of time. One afternoon, as they worked together on a new flower bed, Jason noticed that Sarah seemed distracted. "Are you okay?" he asked, concerned. Sarah sighed. "It's just that sometimes I wonder what my mother would think of all this. See, I think she would have liked this, seeing the garden like this, full of life." Jason took her hand, a gesture of comfort that had become natural between them. "I'm sure she would be proud of you, Sarah. You've changed a lot in these weeks." Sarah looked at him, surprised by the warmth she felt at his words. "Thank you, Jason, for everything." At that moment, a noise startled them. Looking up, they saw Andrew watching them from the mansion's terrace. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that made Sarah shiver. "It seems my father is watching us," she murmured. Jason frowned. "Don't let him intimidate you. This is our space, our garden." Sarah nodded, grateful for the strength Jason transmitted. Together, they returned to their task, aware of Andrew's gaze upon them, but determined not to let it affect them. What neither of them knew was that Andrew wasn't the only one watching them. Hidden among the bushes, an unknown figure was observing them carefully, taking notes in a notebook. The plot was thickening, and soon, very soon, new secrets would come to light. As the weeks passed, the relationship between Sarah and Jason continued to evolve. What had begun as a forced marriage was turning into a genuine friendship, and perhaps into something deeper that neither of them dared to name yet. One afternoon, as Sarah was returning from doing some shopping in the nearby town, she noticed an unfamiliar car parked in front of the main house. Intrigued, she approached stealthily, hearing voices coming from her father's study. "Everything is going according to plan," she heard Andrew say. "Soon, very soon, we can proceed with the next phase." "Are you sure they don't suspect anything?" asked a male voice Sarah didn't recognize. "Absolutely," Andrew replied confidently. "Sarah and Jason are too busy playing happy homemakers to realize what's really at stake." Sarah's heart was pounding. What were they talking about? What was really at stake? Before she could hear more, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned, startled, coming face to face with Jason. "What are you doing here?" he whispered, worried. Sarah gestured for him to be quiet and led him away from the house. Once they were at a safe distance, she told him what she'd overheard. Jason frowned, clearly disturbed by the information. "I always knew your father had a hidden motive for this marriage, but this sounds bigger than we imagined." "We have to find out what's going on," Sarah said with determination. Jason nodded, but his expression was one of concern. "We must be careful. Your father is a powerful and dangerous man when he feels threatened." That night, as they ate dinner in their small kitchen, Sarah and Jason discussed their options. They decided they needed more information before acting. Jason suggested taking advantage of his position as a gardener to observe the comings and goings at the mansion, while Sarah would try to get closer to her father, feigning a renewed interest in the family business. The following days were a mix of tension and expectation. Sarah began visiting her father in his study more frequently, asking questions about the company and showing interest in learning. Andrew, though initially surprised by this change in attitude, seemed pleased. Meanwhile, Jason noticed an increase in the number of visitors to the mansion, men in suits arriving in luxury cars, meetings that stretched into the late hours of the night. Something big was happening. But what? One afternoon, as Sarah was helping Jason plant new rose bushes near the main house, they noticed movement in one of the second-floor windows. It was a room that had always been closed, but now the curtain was moving slightly. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered. Jason nodded. "Someone's in there. Someone who doesn't want to be seen." That night, unable to contain their curiosity, Sarah and Jason decided to investigate. They waited until the lights in the mansion went out and, with hearts pounding, silently slipped towards the house. Using the key Sarah still had, they entered and climbed the stairs, carefully avoiding the steps that creaked. Upon reaching the mysterious room, Sarah took a hairpin from her hair and, to Jason's surprise, began to manipulate the lock. "Where did you learn to do that?" Jason whispered. Amazed, Sarah smiled mischievously. Let's just say my rebellious teenage years had their advantages. With a soft click, the door opened. Sarah and Jason entered, closing the door behind them. The room was dark, but the moonlight filtering through the window was enough to reveal its contents. What they saw left them breathless. The walls were covered with maps, photographs, and documents. In the center was a large board with names and connections traced between them, and there, at the center of it all, were their own names, Sarah Blackwell and Jason Miller. "What is all this?" Sarah murmured, approaching to examine the documents. Jason, for his part, had approached a filing cabinet in the corner. He opened a drawer and began to leaf through the files it contained. "Sarah," he called with a tense voice, "I think you should see this." He handed her a folder. Sarah opened it and as she read its contents, felt the ground moving beneath her feet. "This can't be true," she whispered, looking at Jason with eyes full of shock and confusion. Before they could process what they had discovered, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone was approaching. Sarah and Jason looked at each other, panic reflected in their eyes. They were trapped, with secrets too big to comprehend and nowhere to hide. The doorknob began to turn. Sarah's heart was beating so hard she feared it might be heard throughout the hallway. Jason, acting quickly, took her hand and dragged her towards the large wardrobe in the corner of the room. They barely had time to close the door before someone entered the room. Through the slats of the wardrobe, Sarah and Jason saw Andrew enter, followed closely by a man they didn't recognize. He was tall, with graying hair and an impeccable suit that screamed power and money. "Everything is ready, Ernest," said Andrew, turning on the room light. "Soon we'll be able to proceed with the merger of the companies." The man, Ernestes, nodded with a cold smile. "Excellent. And what about the young ones? Do they suspect anything?" Andrew let out a dismissive laugh. "Sarah and Jason are too busy playing happy house to realize what's happening around them. They're perfect pawns in our game." Inside the wardrobe, Sarah had to bite her lip to keep from letting out a cry of indignation. Jason squeezed her hand, a silent gesture of support and warning. "However," Andrew continued, "there's something that worries me. I've noticed that Sarah has shown a sudden interest in the family business. It could be simple curiosity, but—" "We can't take risks," Ernest interrupted. "If she suspects something, we must act quickly. Remember, Andrew, there's a lot at stake here. Not just our fortunes, but also—" At that moment, Andrew's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. After a brief chat, Andrew turned to Ernest. "We have to go. A problem has arisen at the production plant." The two men quickly left the room, leaving Sarah and Jason in a tense silence filled with questions. Once they were sure Andrew and Ernest had gone, they came out of the wardrobe. Sarah was shaking, a mixture of rage and confusion on her face. "Pawns?" she whispered furiously. "Is that what we are to him? A game?" Jason, though equally disturbed, kept his calm. "Sarah, we have to get out of here. It's not safe to stay." Quickly, they gathered the documents they had been examining before the interruption and stealthily left the room. Once back in the safety of their small house, they spread the papers out on the kitchen table. "I can't believe it," Sarah murmured as she reread the documents. "All this time, everything has been a lie." The papers revealed a truth that neither of them had imagined. Jason wasn't a simple gardener, but the illegitimate son of Ernest, the powerful businessman they had just seen in the secret room. Ernest had kept Jason's existence a secret for years, but now planned to use him as a key piece in an elaborate business strategy. "My real father," Jason murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "All my life I've believed I was an orphan. And now—" Sarah took his hand, offering silent comfort as they continued reading. The documents detailed an intricate plan. Andrew and Ernest planned to merge their companies, creating a conglomerate that would dominate the market. Sarah and Jason's marriage was just a facade to legally unite the two families and facilitate the merger. "My father," Sarah said, disbelief giving way to anger in her voice. "He's been manipulating us all this time, all of us." Jason nodded, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "And my mother." Did she know the truth, or was she deceived too? Sarah stood up, pacing back and forth in the small kitchen. "We have to do something, Jason. We can't let them get away with this." "I agree," said Jason, his voice gaining determination. "But we have to be careful. If Andrew and Ernest discover that we know the truth, they could be dangerous," Sarah finished for him. They looked at each other, the realization of their situation falling heavily upon them. They were no longer just two young people trapped in an arranged marriage. Now they were the only ones who could unmask a conspiracy involving millions of dollars and decades of lies. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, suddenly feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of their discovery. Jason stood up and hugged her, a gesture that had become natural between them in recent weeks. "For now, we have to keep acting normal. We can't raise suspicions while we plan our next move." Sarah nodded against his chest, grateful for his strength and clarity of thought. "You're right, but we need help. We can't face them alone." "I know someone who might be able to help us," Jason said after a moment of reflection. "A friend from college who's now a lawyer. We could trust him." "Perfect," said Sarah, pulling away slightly to look him in the eyes. "Contact him as soon as possible. Meanwhile, I'll keep feigning interest in my father's business. Maybe I can get more information from the inside." They stayed like that for a moment, embracing in the small kitchen the weight of their discoveries and the uncertainty of the future weighing on them. But there was something else too, a connection that had strengthened through shared adversities. "Sarah," Jason said softly, "whatever happens, I want you to know that I'm grateful we're in this together. I can't imagine facing all of this without you." Sarah looked at him, surprised by the intensity of his words and by the warmth she felt growing in her chest. "Me too, Jason. Me too." At that moment, with the moon shining through the kitchen window and the scent of roses from the garden floating in the air, both realized that their feelings had changed. What had begun as a forced marriage had become something real, something deep and true. Slowly, almost without realizing it, their faces drew closer. Their lips met in a soft kiss, timid at first, but which soon deepened, carrying with it all the emotions they had been repressing. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Sarah and Jason looked at each other with new eyes. They were no longer victims of circumstances, but partners, allies, and perhaps something more. "We're going to get through this," Sarah said with determination. "Together." Jason nodded, a smile forming on his lips. "Together." As they prepared for bed that night, with the documents carefully hidden and their minds full of plans and possibilities, Sarah and Jason knew that their lives had changed forever. The secrets they had discovered threatened to destroy everything, but they had also given them something precious, the truth about themselves and about their mutual feelings. The next morning, they woke up with a new determination. They had a long road ahead, full of dangers and challenges, but they were ready to face it. The garden they had cultivated together had become a symbol of their relationship, something beautiful and strong that had grown on the most unlikely ground. What they didn't know was that their problems were just beginning. As they prepared to start their day, pretending normalcy to the outside world, a new threat loomed over them. Someone else had discovered their secret. Someone who had their own plans for the future of Blackwell and Miller Enterprises. The game had begun, and Sarah and Jason were about to discover that in the game of power and family secrets, nothing is what it seems. The sun had barely begun to rise over the horizon when Sarah and Jason left their small house for the garden, maintaining appearances. They set about working on the rose bushes, but their minds were far away. They noticed someone approaching. It was Rose, the housekeeper, with a worried expression on her face. "Miss Sarah, Mr. Jason," she said, in a low voice when she was close enough. "I need to speak with you. It's important." Exchanging surprised looks, Sarah and Jason followed Rose to a secluded corner of the garden where the bushes hid them from prying eyes. "I overheard you last night," Rose confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I know you discovered the truth about Mr. Ernest and Mr. Andrews' plans." Sarah and Jason tensed, alarmed by the revelation, but before they could say anything, Rose continued. Don't worry, I'm on your side. I've worked for the Blackwell family for decades, and I've seen things that have made me question Mr. Andrews' integrity. Why are you telling us this now? Jason asked, still cautious. Rose sighed deeply. Because I can't stay silent anymore. What Mr. Andrew and Mr. Ernest are planning, it's not just about money. There's something bigger at stake, something that could affect many innocent people. Sarah took the older woman's hand, who had been like a second mother to her since her own mother's death. Rose, what exactly do you know? Not all the details, Rose admitted, but I know that the merger of the companies is just the tip of the iceberg. They're planning something that involves protected lands, natural resources, and they don't care who they have to hurt to achieve it. Jason and Sarah exchanged concerned looks. The situation was even more serious than they had imagined. We need your help, Rose, said Jason. Can you get us more information from inside the house? Rose nodded with determination. I'll do what I can, but you must be careful. Mr. Andrew has hired additional security. I think he suspects someone might be investigating his affairs. After agreeing on a secure communication system with Rose, Sarah and Jason returned to their tasks in the garden, their minds spinning with this new information. That afternoon, while Sarah distracted her father with questions about the company, Jason slipped away to meet his lawyer friend, Charlie, at a discreet cafe in the city center. This is pure dynamite. Jason, Charlie said after reviewing the documents, with this we could bring Andrew and Ernest to justice, but we need more evidence, especially about those plans involving protected lands. What do you recommend? Jason asked, eager for a plan of action. Charlie thought for a moment. We need someone inside the company, someone who can access confidential files without raising suspicion. Jason smiled, thinking of Sarah. I think we have the perfect person for that. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Sarah was in her father's study, feigning interest in some financial reports when she noticed something odd. A name on one of the documents caught her attention, Project Phoenix. Father, she asked casually, what's Project Phoenix? I don't recall seeing it before in the reports. Andrew visibly tensed for a moment before regaining his composure. Oh, it's just a new development project. Nothing to worry about, dear. But Sarah could see the lie in his eyes. There was something more, something big, behind that code name. That night, when Jason returned, Sarah told him about Project Phoenix. They decided that would be their next target for investigation. What they didn't know was that while they were planning their next move, someone else was watching. From the shadows of the garden, an unknown figure was observing them, taking notes and making quiet phone calls. The web of lies and secrets was becoming increasingly complex, and Sarah and Jason were about to discover that in this game of power and deception, allies could turn into enemies in the blink of an eye. As they prepared for bed, exhausted by the day's emotions and revelations, Sarah and Jason couldn't imagine that the real danger was just beginning. Project Phoenix was more than it seemed, and unraveling its secrets would lead them down a path from which there would be no turning back. The following days were a careful dance of covert investigation and maintaining appearances. Sarah, taking advantage of her new interest in the family business, spent hours in her father's study, absorbing all the information she could while searching for clues about the mysterious Project Phoenix. Jason, for his part, used his position as gardener to observe the comings and goings at the mansion, noting patterns in the visits of businessmen and local politicians. With Rose's help, who passed them information from conversations overheard in secret, they slowly began to piece together the puzzle. One afternoon, while Sarah was reviewing some files on her father's computer, taking advantage of his absence, she came across an encrypted folder. With her heart racing, she used the skills she had learned in her rebellious teenage years to hack into the system. What she found left her breathless. Project Phoenix was much more than a simple real estate development. It was a master plan to divert a river, destroying a protected ecosystem in the process and displacing entire communities, all for the control of valuable water and mineral resources. With trembling hands, Sarah copied the files onto a USB drive and hurriedly left the study. She needed to tell Jason immediately, but upon reaching the garden, she encountered an unexpected scene. Jason was talking to a man she didn't recognize, As she approached, she heard fragments of their conversation. "You have to understand, Jason. It's your birthright," the man was saying. "I don't care," Jason replied firmly. "I want nothing to do with that man or his money." Sarah cleared her throat, alerting the two men to her presence. Jason turned to her, his face a mixture of surprise and concern. "Sarah," he said, "this is Sam, Ernest's lawyer, my biological father." The man extended his hand to Sarah with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Miller, or should I say, future Blackwell Miller heiress." Sarah shook his hand cautiously, her mind working at full speed. What was Ernest's lawyer doing here? Did they suspect something? "Jason," Sam continued, "think about what I've told you. Ernest is willing to publicly acknowledge you as his son. You would have access to resources you can't even imagine." "I've already told you," Jason replied through gritted teeth. "I'm not interested. My life is here now." Sam sighed, casting a meaningful glance towards Sarah. "I understand, but remember, Jason, offers like this don't last forever. I'll be in touch." With a final evaluating look at Sarah, Sam left, leaving the couple in tense silence. "What was all that about?" Sarah asked once they were alone. Jason ran a hand through his hair, visibly agitated. "Ernest wants to publicly acknowledge me as his son. He says he wants to make things right after all these years." Sarah frowned. "And what do you think?" "I think it's a trap," Jason replied firmly. "I don't trust him or his motives. But," he paused, looking at Sarah with concern, "this could be an opportunity. If I accept, I could have access to information that would help us stop Project Phoenix." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. With everything that had happened, she had almost forgotten about the USB drive in her pocket. "Speaking of that," she said, lowering her voice, "I found something big." Quickly, she told Jason about the files she had discovered. His eyes widened with surprise and horror as Sarah detailed the plans of Project Phoenix. "This is worse than we imagined," Jason murmured. "We have to do something, and soon." "But what?" Sarah asked. "If we go to the police with this, your father, Ernest, could find out and destroy the evidence before we can prove anything." Jason nodded, his mind working quickly. "We need more proof, something they can't deny or make disappear. And I think I know how to get it." "How?" "I'm going to accept Ernest's offer," Jason said with determination. "I'll become his official son and use that position to obtain the information we need." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Jason, that's very dangerous. If they discover what you're doing..." "It's a risk we have to take," Jason interrupted, taking Sarah's hands in his. "We can't allow them to destroy lives and ecosystems out of greed. Besides," he added with a small smile, "I have an advantage they don't know about." "What's that?" Sarah asked, intrigued. "You," Jason replied, pulling her closer. "You're intelligent, brave, and you know the business world better than I do. You'll be my eyes and ears in your father's company while I infiltrate Ernest's." Sarah felt her heart racing, both from the danger of the plan and from Jason's closeness. "It's risky," she said softly, "but you're right, it's our best chance." They looked into each other's eyes, the tension of the moment mixing with the growing attraction between them. Slowly, as if drawn by an invisible force, their faces drew closer until their lips met in a passionate kiss. When they finally separated, both slightly out of breath, Sarah rested her forehead against Jason's. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered. "I promise," Jason replied, gently caressing her cheek. "Together, we're going to unmask this conspiracy and protect those who can't defend themselves." That night, as they prepared for bed, Sarah and Jason knew they were about to embark on the most dangerous mission of their lives. Project Phoenix threatened to destroy more than just an ecosystem. It threatened to destroy lives, communities, and the very future itself. But as they embraced in the darkness, they found strength in their union. What had begun as a forced marriage had become a powerful alliance, forged in the fire of adversity and tempered by a growing love. What they didn't know was that their enemies were closer than they thought. In the main mansion, Andrew was receiving a call that would change the course of events. "Mr. Blackwell," said a voice on the other end of the line. "We have reason to believe your daughter and son-in-law are investigating Project Phoenix. How do you want us to proceed?" Andrew frowned, his face hardening with determination. "Watch them closely. If you confirm they know something, eliminate the threat. We can't allow anything to stand in our way." As he hung up the phone, Andrew looked out the window towards the small house where his daughter and Jason slept, unaware of the danger looming over them. The game had entered a new phase, and the stakes had never been higher. The following days were a whirlwind of activity for Sarah and Jason. While Jason prepared for his official reunion with Ernest, Sarah intensified her presence in her father's company, absorbing all the information she could about Project Phoenix and its ramifications. On a sunny morning, Jason found himself standing in front of the imposing Miller Enterprises building, nervously adjusting his tie. It was the first time he had entered there as Ernest's recognized son, and the sensation was surreal. "Welcome, Mr. Miller," the receptionist greeted him with a rehearsed smile. "Your father is waiting for you in the boardroom." Jason nodded, swallowing hard as he headed towards the elevator. On the way, he couldn't help but notice the curious glances and whispers from the employees. The news of his discovery as Ernest's son had spread like wildfire in the business world. Upon entering the boardroom, Jason came face to face with Ernest and a group of high-ranking executives. The similarity between their features was undeniable, and for a moment, Jason felt a pang of emotion that he quickly suppressed. "Ah, Jason," Ernest exclaimed, rising to greet him with a hug that felt more like a publicity stunt than a genuine gesture. "Welcome to the family, officially." The next few hours were a whirlwind of introductions, explanations about the company structure, and discussions about the role Jason would play in the future. Although he maintained a facade of interest and gratitude, his mind was focused on a single objective: finding evidence of Project Phoenix. Meanwhile, at Blackwell Enterprises, Sarah found herself in an equally tense situation. Sitting in a board meeting, she listened with disguised attention as her father and other executives discussed territorial expansion and resource acquisition. "Project Phoenix is our #1 priority," Andrew declared firmly. "We need to secure those lands before anyone else discovers their true value." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Each new piece of information confirmed the magnitude and cruelty of the plan her father and Ernest had devised. That night, when Jason and Sarah finally reunited in their small house, they shared their discoveries in urgent whispers. "They're planning to start diverting the river in less than a month," Sarah reported, her voice tense with worry. "If we don't stop them soon, it'll be too late." Jason nodded, his face grim. "Ernest mentioned an important meeting next week with some local politicians. I think that's where they plan to seal the deal. We have to be there," Sarah said with determination. "Somehow, we have to record that meeting. It'll be the proof we need." As they discussed the details of their plan, they didn't notice the shadow moving outside their window. A man hired by Andrew to watch them listened to every word with growing interest. The following days were a race against time. Sarah and Jason, with the help of Rose and Jason's lawyer friend, Charlie, worked tirelessly to gather evidence and prepare for the crucial meeting. The night before the big day, as they reviewed their plan one last time, Sarah noticed that Jason seemed distant. "Are you okay?" she asked, taking his hand. Jason looked at her, his eyes full of conflicting emotions. "It's just that, in these days, working in Ernest's company, sometimes I wonder how my life would have been if he had acknowledged me from the beginning, if I had grown up as part of that family." Sarah felt a pang of unease. "Do you regret anything?" Jason shook his head vehemently. "No, not at all. In fact, I'm grateful that things happened the way they did, because they led me to you." They looked at each other intensely, the unspoken words floating between them. Slowly, they drew closer, until their lips met in a passionate kiss, charged with all the love and tension accumulated over the past weeks. When they separated, slightly breathless, Jason caressed Sarah's cheek. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I love you, that you're the best thing that's ever happened to me." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I love you too, Jason. Together, we're going to get through this." They embraced tightly, finding strength and comfort in each other's arms. Tomorrow they would face their greatest challenges, but tonight they had each other. What they didn't know was that their enemies were also preparing. In his office, Andrew was receiving the report from the spy who had been watching the couple. "Sir," the man said, "they have evidence. They plan to expose everything at tomorrow's meeting." Andrew frowned, his face hardening with cold determination. "Then we'll have to make sure they never reach that meeting. Do whatever is necessary." As the night progressed, danger crept ever closer to Sarah and Jason. The next day would determine not only the fate of Project Phoenix, but also their own lives. The dawn of the decisive day arrived with a palpable tension in the air. Sarah and Jason prepared in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts and fears. The plan was risky. Jason would attend the meeting as Ernest's newly recognized son, while Sarah would infiltrate the security control room with Rose's help to access the cameras and record the evidence they needed. "Be careful," Jason whispered, hugging Sarah tightly before departing. "You too," she responded, kissing him softly. "See you on the other side." With a final handshake, they separated, each heading towards their destination. Jason arrived at the Miller Enterprises offices with his heart racing. The security guard greeted him with a nod, allowing him passage without problems. "They're all waiting for you in the conference room, Mr. Miller," he informed him. Meanwhile, Sarah snuck in through the service entrance of Blackwell Enterprises, where Rose was waiting for her with a cleaning uniform. "Quickly, miss," whispered the housekeeper, helping her change. "The meeting is about to start." In the conference room, Jason took a seat next to Ernest, who gave him a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm glad you decided to join us, son," he said in a low voice. "Today is an important day for the future of our family." Jason nodded, struggling to maintain a neutral expression as he observed the other attendees, local politicians, influential businessmen, and, to his surprise, Andrew Blackwell. The meeting began, and it soon became clear that Project Phoenix was much bigger and more sinister than they had imagined. Not only were they planning to divert the river and displace communities, but there were also plans for illegal mining and large-scale money laundering. While Jason listened in horror, Sarah managed to enter the security control room. With the instructions Charlie had provided, she began to hack the system to access the cameras in the conference room. Suddenly, the door to the control room burst open. Sarah turned, expecting to see a security guard, but instead found herself face to face with her father. "Dad," she gasped, her mind working frantically to find an excuse. Andrew looked at her with a mixture of disappointment and cold determination. "Oh, Sarah," he said softly, "did you really think I wouldn't realize what you were doing?" Before Sarah could react, two burly men entered the room, firmly grabbing her. "I'm sorry, daughter," Andrew said, though his voice lacked true remorse. "But I can't allow you to ruin everything I've worked for." As Sarah struggled against her captors in the conference room, Jason began to feel that something was wrong. Sarah should have established contact with him through the small earpiece he was wearing, but he only heard silence. Ernest was in the middle of an explanation about how they planned to persuade the last property owners who were resisting selling their lands when Andrew's phone rang. The Blackwell patriarch excused himself and left the room for a moment. Jason took advantage of the distraction to try to communicate with Sarah. "Sarah, can you hear me?" he whispered as low as he could. Nothing. Panic began to grow in his chest. Meanwhile, Sarah was being escorted to an empty office on the upper floor. Andrew followed closely behind, his face a mask of determination. "I never thought my own daughter would betray me like this," Andrew said. Closing the door behind them, Sarah looked at him defiantly. "Betray you? What about your betrayal of all those innocent people you plan to displace? Of the nature you're going to destroy?" Andrew sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "You don't understand, Sarah. This project will take us to a completely new level. We'll be untouchable." "At what cost, Dad?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Your humanity, your soul." For a moment, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of doubt in her father's eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "I'm sorry, daughter," Andrew said, heading for the door, "but I can't allow you to interfere. Stay here until everything is over." With that, he left the office. Sarah heard the click of the lock and knew she was trapped. Back in the conference room, Jason was increasingly restless. Something had definitely gone wrong. Just as he was considering an excuse to leave and search for Sarah, Andrew returned. "Sorry for the interruption," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Where were we?" Ernest was about to resume his presentation when the door burst open. To everyone's surprise, Rose entered, closely followed by Charlie, Jason's lawyer friend, and a group of police officers. "This is a raid," one of the officers announced. "Everyone stay where you are." Chaos erupted in the room. Ernest and Andrew tried to flee but were quickly apprehended. Jason took advantage of the confusion to slip away. Desperate to find Sarah, he ran through the hallways, calling her name. Finally, he heard banging coming from a locked office. "Sarah!" he shouted, forcing the lock until the door gave way. Sarah threw herself into his arms, tears of relief running down her cheeks. "Jason, what's happening?" "Rose," Jason explained quickly as he guided her out of the office. She and Charlie had a backup plan. They contacted the authorities and gathered enough evidence to justify a raid. As they descended the stairs, they encountered Rose, who hugged them both tightly. "Thank God you're all right," the housekeeper said, her voice trembling with emotion. In the building's lobby, they saw Andrew and Ernest being handcuffed and escorted out. Andrew's eyes met Sarah's for a moment, a mixture of regret and resignation in his gaze. "Dad," Sarah began, but the words caught in her throat. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Andrew said softly as he was led away. "I should have listened to you." As the police took away the conspirators and began to gather evidence, Sarah and Jason stood in the midst of the chaos, still processing everything that had happened. "It's over," Jason whispered, squeezing Sarah's hand. "We did it." Sarah nodded, resting her head on Jason's shoulder. "Yes, but at what cost?" As the sun began to set, bathing the city in golden and reddish hues, Sarah and Jason knew that this wasn't the end, but the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. They had unmasked a conspiracy, saved entire communities and a vital ecosystem, but they had also lost much in the process. However, as they looked into each other's eyes, they found strength and hope in their mutual love. Together, they could face any challenge the future held for them. What they didn't know was that, in the shadows, a figure was watching everything with interest. Someone who had been pulling the strings from the beginning and whose true identity and motives were yet to be revealed. In the days following the dramatic raid, Sarah and Jason found themselves at the center of a media whirlwind. The exposure of Project Phoenix and the corruption surrounding it had become the scandal of the year, and everyone wanted to talk to the young couple who had uncovered it all. Sitting in the small living room of their house, surrounded by newspapers detailing the case, Sarah and Jason tried to process everything that had happened. "I still can't believe we actually did it," Sarah said, leafing through an article that described them as modern-day heroes. Jason took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We did it together, but I know it's not easy for you to see your father like this." Sarah nodded, her eyes clouding with unshed tears. The image of Andrew being escorted by the police still haunted her. "Part of me wants to hate him for everything he did, but he's still your father," Jason softly completed. Before they could continue their conversation, someone knocked on the door. It was Rose, with a worried expression on her face. "Miss Sarah, Mr. Jason," she said hurriedly. "You need to see this." She handed them a manila envelope. Inside, they found documents and photographs that chilled their blood. They were evidence that Project Phoenix was just the tip of the iceberg. There was a much larger network of corruption and organized crime, extending far beyond Blackwell and Miller Enterprises. "Where did you get this, Rose?" Jason asked, reviewing the papers with disbelief. Rose seemed to hesitate for a moment before answering. "From your mother, Miss Sarah." Sarah looked up, surprised. "My mother? But she died years ago." Rose shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "No, my child, your mother is alive, and she's been working all these years to expose this network of corruption." The revelation fell like a bomb. Sarah felt the world spinning around her. What? But how? Why? Rose then told them a story that seemed straight out of a spy novel. Sarah's mother, Emily, had discovered the truth about Andrew's shady business years ago. When she tried to confront him, Andrew threatened her. To protect her daughter, Emily faked her own death and went underground, working tirelessly to gather evidence and dismantle the corruption network from within. "Your mother has been watching over you all this time, Sarah," Rose said softly. "She was the one who asked me to help you, who gave us the information for the raid." Jason, who had been listening in silence, suddenly understood something. The figure in the shadows, the person who was watching us in the garden. Was it her? Rose nodded. "Emily never stopped protecting you, Sarah. And now, with Project Phoenix exposed, she believes it's finally safe to come out into the open." As if on cue, the door slowly opened, and there, after so many years, stood Emily Blackwell. Sarah remained paralyzed, unable to move or speak. Emily, her hair now streaked with grey and lines of worry on her face, took a hesitant step forward. "Sarah, my darling," she said softly, her voice breaking with emotion, with a choked sob. Sarah threw herself into her mother's arms. Years of pain, confusion, and loss melted away in that embrace. Jason watched the scene with a mixture of amazement and emotion. When mother and daughter finally separated, Emily turned to him. "Thank you for taking care of my daughter," she said, extending her hand, "and for helping her uncover the truth." As the night progressed, Emily told them the whole story. She spoke of the corruption network that extended to the highest levels of government and business. She told them how she had worked tirelessly for years, gathering evidence and building a network of allies. "But you two," she said, looking proudly at Sarah and Jason, "you were the key. Your courage in confronting Project Phoenix was what finally gave us the opportunity to act." Sarah, who had been processing everything in silence, finally spoke. "And now what? What will happen to Dad? To Ernest?" Emily sighed. "Andrew and Ernest will face justice for their crimes, but this is bigger than them. With the information we have now, we can dismantle the entire network." Jason, always practical, asked, "And us? What are we supposed to do now?" Emily smiled, a smile that reminded Jason so much of Sarah's that he felt a lump in his throat. "That, my dears, is up to you. But if you're willing, we could use your help to rebuild the companies ethically, to repair the damage done and help the affected communities." Sarah and Jason looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Sarah spoke. "We're in together." As dawn peeked through the window, bathing the room in a golden light, the four of them, Sarah, Jason, Emily, and Rose, sat down to plan the future. A future of justice, redemption, and hope. But even as they celebrated this reunion and the beginning of a new chapter, none of them realized that, once again, they were being watched. In a building across the street, a solitary figure was observing them through binoculars. "Enjoy your victory for now," the figure muttered to itself, "because this is far from over." The shadow of a new threat loomed over them, one that would test their love, their loyalty, and everything they had fought for. The months that followed the fall of Project Phoenix and Sarah's reunion with her mother were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah and Jason, with Emily's guidance, embarked on the monumental task of rebuilding Blackwell and Miller Enterprises from the ground up, this time on a foundation of ethics and social responsibility. It wasn't an easy path. The shadow of past corruption still weighed on them, and many in the business world looked at them with skepticism. But little by little, with determination and hard work, they began to gain the trust of employees, investors, and the public. One sunny afternoon, as they supervised the construction of a new community center in one of the areas that Project Phoenix would have destroyed, Sarah turned to Jason with a smile. "You know, when my father forced us to marry, I never imagined we'd end up like this," she said, intertwining her fingers with his. Jason smiled, remembering those tense first days in the garden. Life has a curious way of surprising us, doesn't it? Their moment of tranquility was interrupted by Emily, who approached with a tablet in hand and a worried expression on her face. "Guys, we have a problem," she said, showing them the screen. It was an article from a sensationalist newspaper insinuating that Emily's story was a fabrication and that the couple was using public sympathy for their own benefit. Sarah frowned. "Who could be behind this?" "I don't know," Emily replied, "but whoever it is, they're well connected. These anonymous sources have information that only someone from the inside could know." Jason, always the strategist, began to think out loud. It could be someone who benefited from the old system and now feels threatened by our changes. As they discussed their options, they didn't realize that someone was watching them from afar. The same shadowy figure that had been monitoring them for months now smiled with satisfaction. "Phase 1 complete," the figure murmured to itself before disappearing into the crowd. The following days were a frenzy of crisis management and public relations. Sarah and Jason worked tirelessly to counter the accusations, while Emily used her contacts to try to uncover the source of the rumors. One night, as Sarah and Jason were reviewing documents in their office, they received an unexpected call. It was Charlie, the lawyer friend who had helped them expose Project Phoenix. "You need to see this," he said, his voice tense. "I'm sending you some files right now." When they opened the email, they were left breathless. They were proofs linking a former associate of Andrew and Ernest, a man named Samuel Morgan, to the smear campaign against them. "Samuel Morgan," Sarah murmured, remembering. "He was like an uncle to me when I was little. He was always at the company parties." Jason frowned. "And he probably benefited enormously from our father's shady dealings." Armed with this new information, Sarah and Jason called an emergency meeting with Emily and their trusted team. They decided it was time to go on the offensive. With the help of Charlie and Emily's media contacts, they began to expose Morgan's connections to the old, corrupt regime. At the same time, they redoubled their efforts in community and social responsibility projects, showing the world the true heart of the new Blackwell-Miller enterprise. The media battle intensified, with Morgan counterattacking with new accusations. But Sarah and Jason stood firm, supporting each other in difficult times. One night, exhausted after another long day, Sarah found Jason in the garden of their house, the same one where their unlikely love story had begun. "Do you think we'll ever have peace?" Sarah asked, sitting next to him on the bench. Jason drew her close, softly kissing her forehead. "I don't know, but I know that as long as we're together, we can face anything." It was at that moment, surrounded by the scent of the roses they had planted together, that Sarah had an epiphany. "Jason," she said, suddenly sitting up, "I think I know how we can end this once and for all." She explained her plan. They would organize a grand charity gala, inviting all the key players from the business and political world. There, in front of everyone, they would expose the complete truth about their story, about the corruption they had unmasked, and about their plans for the future. "It'll be risky," Jason warned. "Morgan will surely be there." "Exactly," Sarah smiled. "And that will be our opportunity to confront him directly." The following days were a flurry of preparations. Emily used her contacts to ensure the presence of key figures, while Charlie prepared a dossier with all the evidence they had gathered. The night of the gala arrived. The hall was filled with the city's elite, all curious to see what the young couple who had shaken the establishment had to say. Sarah and Jason took the podium, hand in hand. With a clear and firm voice, Sarah began to tell their story. She spoke of the corruption they had uncovered, of the lies and manipulations, but also of hope and redemption. "We've made mistakes," she said. "Our families have caused harm, but we're here to make things right, to build a better future for everyone." As she spoke, Jason noticed Morgan among the crowd, his face growing paler as Sarah revealed proof after proof of his complicity. When they finished their presentation, the hall was silent for a moment before erupting into applause. Journalists rushed forward with questions, investors approached with proposals, and politicians promised their support. Amidst the chaos, they saw Morgan trying to sneak towards the exit. But Emily, who had been waiting for this moment, intercepted him along with 2 police officers. "Samuel Morgan," one of the officers said, You're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and obstruction of justice." As Morgan was escorted out, Sarah and Jason looked at each other, a mixture of relief and triumph in their eyes. "We did it," Sarah whispered. "Together," Jason added, leaning in to kiss her. The kiss was interrupted by Emily, who approached with a wide smile. "I'm so proud of you two," she said, hugging them. "You've done something extraordinary here." In the days and weeks that followed, Sarah and Jason's story became a symbol of hope and change. Blackwell Miller Enterprises flourished under their ethical leadership, inspiring other corporations to follow their example. A year after the gala, Sarah and Jason renewed their wedding vows in the same garden where it had all begun. This time, it wasn't an arranged marriage, but a celebration of the true love that had grown between them, as they exchanged rings with Emily, Rose, and their closest friends as witnesses. Sarah and Jason reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. "Who would have thought," Jason said, "that a forced marriage would lead us to this?" Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with love and happiness. "Sometimes, fate has better plans than our own." And so, surrounded by the flowers they had cultivated together, Sarah and Jason sealed their love with a kiss, ready to face any challenge the future might hold, as long as they were together. Somewhere, Andrew Blackwell, serving his sentence in prison, smiled as he read the news of his daughter's vow renewal. Despite all his mistakes, in the end, he had managed to unite two soulmates, even if it was for the wrong reasons. And in the garden of the Blackwell Miller mansion, a new rosebush began to bloom, its vibrant red petals symbolizing the love, passion, and determination that had triumphed over adversity.